The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be back again with you today. We are at the Bear Psychology Radio Show, bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. And I am really delighted. We have yet another fantastic guest. And I just, during the conversation before the show started, I found out a whole lot of stuff about our guest today, and I'm going to try to include some of it in because it makes it an even richer conversation than I had expected, so I'm really delighted. Today we have Jonathan Robinson, and he writes about couples. He writes about MDMA, and the current book is called Ecstasy for Couples: How MDMA Therapy Can Create More Love and Less Conflict in Your Relationship. Most couples don't begin their relationship expecting to be trapped in cycles of criticism, withdrawal, defensiveness, resentment, loneliness, or emotional distance. But anybody who's done any couples work knows that this is exactly what happens to many people as they engage in long-term relationships. And that's not because they don't want to have close relationships, but there are things within our emotional and psychological nature that have shaped us to have these conflicts. So today we're exploring an emerging and controversial approach to relationship healing, the use of MDMA within a structured couples therapy process. And the guest, as I said, is Jonathan Robinson, and he has written several other books that I hope we'll get a chance to speak about, including a couples book, which he just told me Oprah said was the best couples book she ever read. Now, this dates back a number of years, but he told me that it led to a whole lot of attention for his book, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time exploring some of what he discovered and shared in his couples book as well. So we're really going to talk about how couples get stuck, how MDMA might temporarily reduce fear and defensiveness, or kind of break down that kind of the psychic bonds and chains that we rope ourselves into and on an unconscious level, and how the experience might help partners communicate with greater honesty, empathy, and compassion. We're also going to discuss the risks, the contraindications, the legal concerns, the ethical responsibilities, and the critical importance of turning insight into lasting change. Welcome, Jonathan, to the Bear Psychology Radio Show. As I had mentioned earlier, we have wonderful people listening to the show. So I want to invite you, as I always do, to email us with your questions, your thoughts, your comments to instudio101@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Thank you, Anna. I'm really looking forward to this. This will be fun.
Me too. I think you've spent a lot of your career writing and teaching about relationships, communication, and well-being. Let's maybe just start with that. What drew you first to that kind of work?
Well, what usually draws a person to this kind of work is pain and suffering, where you feel that it's not going so well. So I was interested in how can I do this better? And I was kind of nerdy growing up. So the first time I took MDMA, I was kind of exposed to the world of love and intimacy and vulnerability. And my quest was, how can I get there with my wife without the drugs? And what tools, including MDMA and communication tools, might help establish more love and less conflict?
So it sounds like it was a personal journey, Jonathan, that you had a realization in your own life, and you also wanted to bring some meaningful connection to your own relationship. So experimentation, grappling.
Yeah, and then I started to see after I wrote this book called Communication Miracles for Couples that became a bestseller that most couples were having a hard time nowadays. And it was partly because they just didn't have the experience or the simple tools that could really make a difference in their life.
Right. So that kind of opened that door with a lot of detailed reflection by the sounds of it.
Absolutely. And Anna, being a therapist, that most couples nowadays, they have a hard time because they don't understand each other very well. I never have couples come into my office and say, we really understand each other. That's why we want a divorce. That doesn't happen. But I think once couples know a few simple methods that they can, solve problems, understand each other, that there's just a lot more love to be had in most relationships.
That's very sweet. Wow. Well, I do see that communication miracles for couples, easy and effective tools to create more love and less conflict. It's still actually considered, or maybe this is a past rating, but it was definitely a bestseller, New York Times bestseller in marriage and family relationships. So nice. People would probably want to know about that. First published in 1997, but that does not mean that it isn't a good read. Sometimes things are timeless.
Yeah. Yeah. And, nowadays with the pace of life and all the stress people have, it's more important than ever that people have simple ways to really connect. And one of the things I found in working with a lot of couples is, normal couples therapy, marriage therapy can be a long slog. And we need more quick, better technology, so to speak. So I got into doing MDMA therapy because I found I could do 2 years of therapy or the equivalent of 2 years of therapy in a single day. And that way you could really help people over a lot of suffering quickly.
So let's kind of talk a little bit. First of all, let's slow down a bit, but then let's speed up later.
Okay.
So the long slog of couples work rather than MDMA suggests that you're getting access to something with the use of this medicine. And there's a reason for that. What is it, this MDMA? And why does it get access to what would otherwise be a long and slow process?
Well, normally when couples come to marriage therapy, they've been having trouble for a number of years, and they're kind of locked in a cycle of blaming and shaming and complaining. And of course, that never works. It's never been where you blame your partner about something. They go, oh, yeah, now I see. I'll have to change my ways. That doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to help couples get beyond that. And with MDMA, unlike the other psychedelics, it just makes you feel open and loving and at your best. And it does this by reducing blood flow to the amygdala, which is the fear area of the brain. So when people have no fear and they feel open-hearted, it's really easy to solve the problems that have come up in the relationship. So people are no longer defensive, they are very honest and open, and they have no fear. And that's really the best way to heal and enhance a relationship quickly, rather than have to go through all the defense mechanisms couples often have with their blaming and defensiveness.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah. And that's where a lot of the rigid, internalized, unconscious content is in our minds, how we continuously repeat the same struggles, problems, and patterns rather than uncover a new way of living our lives. We'll just continue to return back to the internalized psychological structure. And if there's no way of kind of putting that on hold for a short period of time, it becomes almost impossible to have a different kind of conversation. So that's very interesting that that is what you're finding quite easily.
Yeah, and that's well said. And then with MDMA, you can actually see your dysfunctional patterns more clearly. That might take a while in normal marriage counseling, but in the MDMA therapy, people see all kinds of stuff. And I record the session so that they can better see how good communication would look. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll share a funny story. My parents um, often wondered why I was working with this drug. And I said, well, the only way to really know what it does is to try it out. And to my surprise, they were willing to try it out. And so I gave them the medicine, told them how to take a good set and setting. A year later, I asked them if they'd taken it, and they said that they had, but that nothing happened. And that was very surprising to me. So I got more details. They said, yeah, we tried it, and after 20 minutes, nothing happened. So we ended up sitting on the couch. We had nothing planned that evening. And then their eyes kind of lit up and they said, well, ends up we ended up having the best night of our entire marriage. We talked about how much we loved each other, and we had had some big problems that we had been dealing with, and they all got solved during that night. The only disappointment was that the drug never took effect. Well, I'm laughing this whole time because that's the exact effect of the drug. It makes you feel at your best, you're open and honest, and it doesn't make you feel weird like other psychedelics. It just makes you feel like you at your absolute best. And on my dad's deathbed, the last words he said to me was how grateful he was that I had given him that medicine, because it had changed the relationship with my stepmother. And even one session like that, not guided, can have a very profound impact on couples.
Wow, that is such an interesting story, and I will just share my naivety. I've never tried MDMA, so when you described it having no effect, that's very interesting because I think that would lessen the fear that a lot of people have about some of these um, plant medicines or psychedelic interventions that have become more popularized over the last number of years.
Yeah, things like magic mushrooms, LSD, ketamine, ayahuasca, about a third of the people taking those things will have a very challenging time. So those are very different, and they involve hallucinations and things like that. I've led about 700 MDMA journeys,
Mm-hmm.
and so far, 0 out of 700 have had a hard time.
Hmm.
So, I guess you could have a glass of water and have a hard time, but that's very unusual. So it's a very gentle um, and pleasant experience. That's why it's often called ecstasy. And it's very safe. In fact, it's so safe that since the COVID pandemic, I do pretty much all my sessions over Zoom, which I would never do with any of the other plant medicines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're going to come back to that in a minute. I just want to mention that in the introduction, you note that in 1984 you did a master's thesis on therapeutic effects of MDMA in overcoming traumatic memories. Now, in 1984, that is, you know, there's a lot of research being done on medicines of this kind right now through MAPS and other organizations,
Mhm.
but you were involved in this in 1984, which I think is a bit unusual. And like, how did you kind of, first of all, want to explore MDMA and traumatic memories? And, how is it that you arrived at that? And what did you find out from your research in 1984?
Well, back in 1984, MDMA was completely legal. So I could do it in my graduate work. And I just found that it was so effective for me in overcoming my trauma. I had a pretty traumatic childhood, a lot of violence in my household, and said, well, this works better than anything I've ever seen. So I worked with 36 clients who had trauma, and 90% of them said that the one session either cured their trauma symptoms or dramatically impacted them for the better. Well, this was very enlightening and unexpected. So I had, when it was made illegal 3 months later, the journals wouldn't publish it because it was now an illegal drug. And it took, 30 years of MAPS doing studies and such before it got the publicity of how effective it is.
Wow. Oh, that must have been shocking for you to go from this is completely acceptable in 1984, and then you're trying to get your document published and your research published, and no, couldn't do it.
Yeah, it was frustrating, and but these things take time, and now it is all coming out. What's happening now is that big pharma is creating MDMA analogs, meaning they're changing one molecule so
Mhm.
they can patent it, and soon these drugs will be available in a larger way, in a legal way.
Yes, that's often how it goes before it becomes, before it is no longer completely restricted. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
very interesting. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute because I want to cover that Schedule 1 and what that really means, and because people will find that interesting as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in chapter 1 you write, although blaming one's partner never helps, it's quite addictive. How would MDMA help couples pivot away from blaming?
Well, it's interesting because blaming is a defense mechanism that gets you to not see how you're contributing to a situation. And when the blood flow is restricted to the amygdala, people can see. I ask them, well, how'd you contribute to this problem? And people are now miraculously able to see all of that, which was kind of hidden behind a doorway in their brain beforehand. And when people are admitting how they contribute and there's honest communication, what happens is a lot of healing takes place in a very short period of time. All the accumulated resentments start to disappear. You can overcome some traumatic memories and hurts, and the love is restored. And love is the most powerful force in the universe. So once people are feeling that with each other again, you can overcome a lot of difficulty in a short period of time.
Mhm. Nice. I want to read a couple of the messages that we're getting. Uh, starting with Robert. Thank you for your email. Robert asks, are these drugs addictive? Is MDMA addictive? Is it expensive? And who can prescribe it?
Great question. So is it addictive? It ends up that, any drug can be addictive, although MDMA is often considered to be what's called anti-addictive, meaning if you take it often, it stops working. So people tend not to take it often because if they do, it has no effect. In that way, I would say it's not particularly addictive, although sometimes people will push that envelope and see, well, is it still working? Okay, I'll take it. But it's not considered addictive for that reason. Um, Currently, it's illegal in most countries, although no one has ever been arrested for doing MDMA therapy. So although it is technically illegal, I have the local sheriff actually send me clients. So, it's kind of in this gray area where if you're doing therapy with it, the cops aren't particularly worried about that.
Okay.
Eventually, it will be rescheduled, probably. It's a lot of a political thing, having to do with money, FDA, big pharma, all these things. So either MDMA or a drug very similar to it will soon be rescheduled as a medicine. And that could happen as soon as a year from now. But in
That's
the
interesting. It's kind of similar to what happened to ketamine,
Mhm.
um, which also had a molecule change so that it could be marketed. And, like ketamine is not an expensive drug, but, there are some products on the market now that are extremely expensive, kind of ketamine edits, as
Yeah.
in ketamine that has had this molecular change so it could be marketed. And by the sounds of it, that's the way it gets to this place. So
Yeah.
MDMA remains a restricted category, a Schedule One drug,
In
and
most countries.
well, definitely in my country and
Yeah.
definitely in the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it seems to me that this is still going to um, lead to constraints for most people, not all people, most people, simply because it is not legal. And, like reasonably, people have concerns about things that are not legal. So,
Mhm.
how do you kind of address that? What do people say to you about their fears and concerns?
Well, there are contraindications. First of all, people on SSRIs or antidepressants should not take MDMA because they work on the same neural pathways and they cancel each other out, so you wouldn't actually feel it. And of course, there's concerns if your health is, if you've had a stroke or you have severe heart problems, that's dangerous. When I work with people, I make sure that I have a full medical history so that there's no contraindications. But also, when I work with people, I want to make sure that they get really pure medicine. And what I do is I give them the uh, name of somebody on the app Signal, which is an encrypted app where they can get good medicine for a very inexpensive price. I've been doing that for about 20 years without any problems. Because the biggest danger with any of these drugs is if you get medicine that's not pure.
Mhm.
And when I work with people, that's the process that we do. I don't sell the drug. I just supply information of how they can get it uh, pure at a very good price without a legal worry. We've never had a problem with that. As I said, law enforcement is interested in uh, getting people who are doing dangerous drugs like fentanyl that kills a lot of people rather than trying to do anything with somebody actually trying to heal their trauma or their relationship. So I've never had a problem personally or with the 500 people I've trained to do this type of work.
Right, Right. So I know you have a training protocol that people can learn through your website. Do you want to
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, people can find out about mdmatraining.net. I've trained about 500 healers to do this type of work just because it's so effective and people want to, help people quickly. And it's been very gratifying to get people all the information. Doing, as you know, Anna, doing psychotherapy is an art and a science, and you want to know all the nuance there. So I have what's a 50-hour training on how to do this effectively and safely, because safety is really important. As I said, I've had zero problems in 700 clients, and that's because I make sure that this work is done safely in a way that can really benefit people.
Beautiful. People are very interested in you, Jonathan. So here's a message from Irene who
Uh-huh.
says, Jonathan, I don't know if this is true, it's just a statement.
Yeah.
Irene, thank you for your message. Jonathan was a spokesperson with some major products and companies. How did that happen? Very interesting.
Uh-huh. Well, I've worked with companies ranging from Microsoft to Google. I've written 16 books, and really I have a philosophy that people need very simple techniques to make their life better. And whether that's in the corporate environment or one-to-one, there's a hunger for that. We all have enough information, but what we need is something that we can do in our lives that's quick. For example, uh, I'll give a couple of techniques to your listeners in this interview, but here's one that I like because it takes 2 seconds and you can eliminate 90% of your arguments with this technique. You know, Whenever couples have an argument, it's usually a slow boil where they keep on getting more and more tense and soon they're shouting at each other. So my wife and I have used this technique. I call it yellow light. Either of us can say the words yellow light at any time when we're starting to get tense. And the agreement is that we will take 2 minutes to be completely quiet. And what that does is it interrupts the momentum of upset.
Hmm.
And during those 2 minutes, you kind of take some deep breaths, you relax, you reset, and you start over again. When my wife and I were married 30 years ago, we argued a fair amount, which was embarrassing because I had just written a book called Communication Miracles. But I came
Life
across,
gives us every opportunity to heal our own storyline.
yes, yes.
So,
But
we're as clinicians, we're not allowed to be anything but humble because inevitably something's going to happen that just shows us how imperfect we are.
exactly. And hopefully we can use that information to know that, we need to give people really simple methods that can make a difference because, you know, no philosophy is going to help when you're upset. You need something very practical. So in the last 7 years, my wife and I haven't had any arguments because as we're starting to get tense, we'll say the word yellow light, we'll reset, and then we go back into trying to have a really good communication.
That's really a beautiful story. Thank you. This is from Tim, who says, how many books has Jonathan published and does he do TV as well?
Well, I was on Oprah a lot in the 90s, and of course that made a big difference. And then I've done a lot of CNN and Geraldo and the Today Show and the Tonight Show, blah, blah, blah. Um, so I've written 16 books, and my two my two biggest interests were how to bring more love into relationships and how to bring more inner peace into one's life. And I think those should be the two things that most people are interested in because nothing's more important than relationships and inner peace. So I tried to, I was a wreck growing up and said, well, how can I find the best methods for achieving inner peace and more love in relationships? And that's really what my books tend to be about.
Oh, that is really beautiful, Jonathan. Before we got on this show, you were telling me about your spirituality, the Awareness Explorers podcast that you have. And, that kind of fits in with your mission, I think, on the planet as well. Maybe you can
Yeah.
tell our listeners about this Awareness Explorers podcast that they might want to learn about and maybe join so that they can hear a little bit more from you and your guests.
Sure. Yeah, we've been doing that for about 8 years, and we have over 200 episodes. And I've interviewed everybody from Deepak Chopra to the Dalai Lama. And basically, our conversations are asking the question, what is the easiest and best way you have ever come across for finding inner peace and lasting happiness? And these are people who know a lot of stuff. And I converse with them kind of like you converse with people, Anna, and the conversations are really interesting, and I get to learn lots of good stuff and pass it on to other people. So we also have awarenessexplorers.com, all those episodes, and also guided meditations that are all free.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I hope people will take the link and explore a little bit about that aspect of your work because it sounds really interesting. I was really excited when I heard you talk about it before we started this show. This is a message from Trevor. Thank you, Trevor. Trevor asks, is this book just about sex?
Well, no, it's about how MDMA can help people to have a more loving relationship and heal past wounds. But the three problems that couples face the most are issues about money, issues about sex, and issues about parenting. So in the book, I talk about how to heal and work through those issues in very specific ways. For example, let's just take the subject of sex. A lot of couples are having a really hard time with their sexual relationship. They're too afraid to talk about it openly, which doesn't help. On MDMA, people can talk about their sex life as if they're talking about the weather. And that opens up new possibilities, such as what do you like that your partner does? What don't you like? What helps get you in the mood? What prevents you from getting in the mood? What are the obstacles to a better sex life? These things are things that couples are normally very afraid to talk about openly. And yeah, on MDMA, we can have a very open discussion, and some of those issues can be healed very quickly.
For sure. This is on the same vein, Jonathan. This is from Kelly, who asks, "What's the difference between sex and love in a relationship?"
Well,
Right?
Anna, that's a big question, but
I know.
they're really different forces. Love is, a lot of people have said this, that women often use love to get to sexual feelings, and men often use sex to get to love feelings. So we're coming from slightly different perspectives. And what I help couples to do is to understand how their partner's sexuality works, because people have different ways of feeling aroused. And so love is, everybody knows what love is, but sex sometimes for some people is not that connected to love. And I have to help explain to men and women what gets you aroused, what can your partner do specifically that will help you to open to more sexual feelings, which is different than opening to love feelings for some people.
Nice. This is from Amy. The question is Jonathan a medical doctor? And I think, Amy, let's explore actually what Jonathan's background actually is. So maybe tell us a little bit about your training and background.
Yeah, I was trained to be a psychotherapist. I was a psychotherapist, a licensed therapist for about 35 years. Recently, I gave up renewing my license just because doing this type of work, could get in trouble with the licensing board. But my training is as a psychotherapist. And then spiritually, I have an interesting background in that I was born Jewish. I spent 2 years in a Christian monastery, 2 years in a Buddhist monastery, 1 year in a Hindu monastery. And and many years with different spiritual teachers. So I'm very eclectic. I would say my philosophy is people should do what works for them. And sometimes we get stuck in whether a religion or a method in our relationships where it's no longer working. And my goal is to offer people new possibilities where they can have a deeper experience of love and peace.
Wow. Yeah, so I mean, we want to keep those doors open because we're living in a time where there's a lot of kind of conflict in the world. And
Yeah,
I like that you keep coming back to love and peace because this is, the inner landscape that you're carrying with you everywhere you go. And, you've got to have access to that for yourself. We cannot change what's happening in the world entirely by our desire alone because people may simply not go along with it. But there's
yeah,
this inner state that we can get access to. And I mean, I just think it's in many ways our personal growth. It is our own kind of North Star in a way. We have to allow ourselves to continue moving in that direction, in whatever form that it takes us. And it's not an easy path necessarily because, inner growth is not always that smooth and not always that easy. But having that guide and the openness for it, I think is a really powerful, it's a powerful thing in life. So I'm glad that you're talking about it. I don't really hear somebody with such a clarity about love and peace. Even though I talk to people about clinical work all the time, you're bringing in that spirituality and love and peace kind of focus, which I think is really crucial, particularly at this juncture in time. People want
one
to
of the
know.
time,
Sorry.
Anna, one of the times I was on the Oprah was with a panel of people who had had near-death experiences. They had been clinically dead for at least 5 minutes. And it was interesting to me how they each shared, if you know about this phenomena, each shared that when they were clinically dead, that they felt like they were reviewing their life in terms of how loving they had been.
Hmm.
And I found that fascinating that that seemed to be an experience that people from different cultures or in different religions all say that that's really what they experienced when they were no longer, registering any brain activity, but then came back to life. And so I do think that, love and peace are really the keys to our purpose. Unfortunately, we live in a culture or a culture that focuses on material things and getting ahead, which don't usually lead to the happiness that we're really after.
Yeah, simply acquiring more is not necessarily going to bring us to that sense of peace and contentment that most of us actually want in life.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm really glad that you're kind of on this kind of point. I mean, we could talk about the fine details of a lot of things, but in the end, what are we really doing here? And,
Mhm.
what do we want out of this whole thing? And yeah, nice. Karen would like to know if the drug MDMA is Molly.
Yes, yeah. It goes by three different names, really: ecstasy, Molly, and MDMA. Um, Sometimes one term has become more popular than other. uh, Obviously it was used in raves for a long time, but using it therapeutically is so much different than how it was often used in the past. It's it can be a fun because it does make you feel good, but it's really the best use of it is to quickly heal and enhance things like trauma and help couples in relationships. In fact, that's how it originally got popular in the 70s. It was used as a therapy drug for couples. And then when people realized it made them feel good, it got into the dance scene and raves, and people started to abuse it in various ways.
This is from Steve, who says, hello to everyone. how do we give more love to someone to avoid conflict? It's not easy. Hints?
Yeah, one thing to realize is that everybody is very unique. So let me give you a kind of a funny example. I know that my dog's interests are different than mine. So she likes to smell poop. Now I find that completely disgusting, but because I love her, when we go for a walk, I point out, hey, you might want to smell this because that's what you're into, you know. So my wife is into things like ballet, which I hate. I'm into football, which she hates. But supporting somebody means that you support what is important to them. And so I look into when ballet companies will be in town. I get tickets. I appreciate things about my wife. I have a note. This is embarrassing, but I'll admit it. I have a note on my computer that says, appreciate Kirsten, my wife, because sometimes I forget. But studies show that the amount of appreciations you give your mate has a major impact on how happy that relationship is. So every day I try to tell her at least one thing I appreciate about her. And these simple ways of creating more love and more pleasant experiences for your mate usually come back to you, because if, the term happy wife, happy life.
Yes, well, I think it goes both ways, Jonathan. So,
Absolutely.
I really love the fact that you're kind of recognizing that you can find the ways in which you appreciate your wife. But I do find that it does tend to work much better if there's this sense of kind of cross pollination,
Yeah.
to really bring that forward with within the interpersonal relationship. So good for you that you're kind of bringing it in, and I bet she's bringing it in too.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a very interesting study that shows that the amount of appreciations you give to your mate tends to be very similar both ways. So if you do one a month, you tend to get one a month. If you do one a day, you tend to get one a day. So as you say, what goes around comes around, what comes around goes around. And so, yeah, the better you treat your partner, more likely the better they'll treat you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Nice. Greg is asking, can anyone take your MDMA course?
There is a application process in which people have to give a little bit of background. And so one of the things that I suggested was that you don't have to have a clinical degree to take the course. But I do want to have people who have a good heart, who have a, a good experience in working with other people in order to take the course, because I think those are the important prerequisites. I have found that having a clinical degree might help. Sometimes it might not help. But the short answer is that we do consider almost everyone as a possibility for taking the course, but they do have to be accepted.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In chapter 3, we'll put aside some of those drug schedules and all that kind of stuff because we got the picture. Molly, yes, MDMA. There's still some legal constraints that we have to consider. Not everybody's comfortable with that, and all of that is true. But I think you write in your book you've got a time-tested formula
Mm-hmm.
that you use to help couples go from feeling adversarial to feeling accommodating and open with each other. Can you give us a sense of how you walk somebody through that?
Sure. Well, first thing that you want to do is get couples emotionally bonded. A lot of the couples I see have had troubles for years, so they feel pretty separate. So I have people sometimes tell me how they got to know each other, what that was like, and they start to feel more connected. I ask them, what do you appreciate about your partner? And let the good feelings start to coalesce. Once that's happening and people are feeling the effects of the medicine, we go into what are the problems that they have? What obstacles are in the way of them feeling more love? And a lot of times we solve these problems by brainstorming possible solutions and going beyond the normal things that happen, like blaming and whose problem it is. We negotiate how to handle the money issue, how to deal with the sex issue, how to deal with raising the kids. So we come up with very specific negotiated strategies. The other thing I do is I really help couples to understand each other better, because when you understand your partner, you are much more effective in creating a sense of connection and empathy. And I find that empathy is really important in relationships. And most of us are not good at giving empathy. So when that ingredient becomes part of the relationship, it kind of heals a lot of wounds that have happened in the past. And then a week after the session, we go into a integration session in which we talk about the insights that they had, and we talk about how to make sure that you're using the simple tools to make sure that in the future you can handle difficulties with greater ease.
In your chapter 8, intimacy inhibitors, which kind of links directly into what you just said, you have this acknowledgement formula. And this is from Communication Miracles for Couples. So for those people who are listening, I'm going to just kind of refer you back to that book, because it seems to me that a lot of your work, Jonathan, from one book to the other, they really link together well. So it's nice to go back to the core materials. But here you reference Communication Miracles for Couples, your acknowledgement formula, which is this fill in the blank method for making sure couples don't dismiss their partner's feelings. Can you kind of walk us through how you use that? What happens when people finish this acknowledgement formula?
Yeah, I found that this was the key communication skill, that if people got this right, almost everything else fell in line. And because I'm your average guy who isn't great at relationships originally, I saw that I can do this simple formula, which is when my wife has a hard time or is talking about her day, to use the formula, it sounds like blank. And by blank, I mean, it sounds like, and I do one sentence or less to summarize her experience. And then I say, that must feel, and I guess what the feeling is like. Now, that's really a formula for giving people empathy and understanding. And when instead of dismissing or blaming or trying to fix your partner, you're giving them empathy and understanding, all the love starts to open up in the relationship. And when I find that couples can use a simple, it sounds like that must feel formula, a lot of the problems that they have simply disappear. And, I got to spend a fair amount of time with Oprah, and I saw that she was using this formula in almost every communication. And that's why people like Oprah. She's a really good listener. She really has that empathy, and that's all she was doing. So if you want to be as good communicator as Oprah, that's really the formula that you can use.
It just sounds like it's an open way of allowing people to express what is true for them. And we all love to have that sense that somebody is actually showing up for us and truly wants to hear,
And getting us, and there's so many things that we do that aren't like that. We interrupt people, we dismiss them, we fix them, we blame them. All those things really block the flow of love. And this one formula really is a great way to open up that flow of love.
It's amazing. It's a really nice kind of focused way of bringing people into real conversation. And the fact that sometimes communication with couples, it just literally hits a brick wall, and now you're giving tools that open that up. So you, along with, every other person I've ever spoken to about either plant medicines or therapeutic, psychedelic medicines or anything like that, always seems to add other elements to reinforce the learning that has occurred as a result of these therapeutic medicines.
Yeah, that's so important. And that's why I have one or more integration sessions after their journey, because you don't want to just have an experience. You want to have the tools and the insight that will keep the relationship moving in the right direction afterwards.
You also have a series of questions that you've put in your book in chapter 10, like these common questions that you use with couples, and I'm just going to read a couple of them. So what's the payoff for this behavior? If you continue to do this, what might be potential downside? If you could change, how would you react to this? What might be the potential upside? What is something you've been afraid to ask your partner about? I wonder, first of all, how you ever came to these questions. They get to the heart of a lot, and how your couples respond to them.
Well, in MDMA, they respond really well with great insight and right from the heart. And I came to these questions because I found myself just asking them over and over again when dealing with these deep therapy issues in MDMA therapy. And I love good questions because they get people focused in the right direction. And in fact, I have something called the 12 questions to instant intimacy. And these are questions I offer for free on my website that people can get. And when you ask your partner or even a friend these 12 questions, it immediately creates a bond. And if people are interested in that, they can go to the letters XTC for couples.net and get those 12 questions for free. And, nowadays we need these little helpers to find intimacy because there's so many distractions. Now, if you look at the word intimacy, the instructions are in the word, into me see. And these questions help to create those moments of special bond with a friend or a partner.
Is there a typical pattern to how that MDMA couples session with integration unfold?
Yeah, there is. First, the emotional connection, then a discussion about difficult issues and problem solving, then appreciation for what they went through, because that's, difficult work. And then in the integration session, I'll have had people listen to the recording so it's all fresh in their minds. In the integration session, we come up with specific things they commit to doing that are different than what they did before. It might be the yellow light formula or the acknowledgement formula, or it might be I commit to saying 3 appreciations to my mate this week. That they make a vow or a commitment, and then I have a way to motivate them to make sure that they follow through with those commitments, because just insight isn't enough. You have to change behavior. And I have very powerful ways of making sure people change disruptive behavior and how to include some more effective behavior that's going to make a difference.
Post MDMA.
Yeah, in the integration session.
Okay, so really the work doesn't stop after the MDMA session. There's an expectation of doing the work and keeping it moving forward. And I always like to say that, because unfortunately these medicines approach to dealing with longstanding historical issues do not always get fixed in the one session. For most people, they don't get fixed in the one session. There can be this realization and then a return to pre-existing behaviors, because those pre-existing behaviors, they're very well infused into the way in which we operate in our lives. So, how do you deal with that, like the potential disappointments or frustrations that people have if it's not a kind of one time, experience and, perfect integration?
Well, part of it is that when people without any defensive see that something they're doing is hurting their partner and themselves, that goes a long way to changing their behavior. We never put our hand on a hot stove because we're very clear that that's going to hurt. So when you strip people of their defensiveness and they see that this is hurting them and keeping them from love, that's very powerful information. Then I couple that with a way that they can, listen to their partner better or give their partner what they need. And that kind of 1-2 punch of seeing clear insight, plus having a very simple way of doing new behavior, along with support, which I offer to couples. I find that formula is very powerful, and it really does change people and couples' experience. Although, it does take work too.
It does take work. So, I mean, I guess that's what I want people to understand. Like, don't think you're going to do MDMA and then all of a sudden every aspect of your life is going to be different, because, it's not going to happen quite like that. And change actually requires something within inside of you to stabilize. And, based on the law of sustainment in psychology, you cannot maintain actions that are out of alignment with a self-belief that is rigidly held. So, for example, if you believe I'm not worthy of love, even if you've kind of understood that you don't want to do hurtful things to your spouse, there will still be this potentially unresolved aspect of your own belief structure that you have to get access to. So, I really, hope that the listeners understand, it's not a one and done. It's an opportunity for you to break down some rigid belief structures so that you can investigate and explore, rather than simply approach it one time and say, well, you did that, it's all done now. So what are your thoughts
Yeah.
about that, Jonathan?
Well, and there's accelerated ways to change people. Like if you want to go from Toronto to Florida, you could go north 24,000 miles, or you can go south 2,000 miles, or, the different ways to get to Florida. You can take a jet and you'll be there in 4 hours, or you can walk and be there in 4,000 hours. So what MDMA therapy does is it just accelerates a process greatly that can also happen in traditional counseling. And with the right support, the right tools, can keep those changes ongoing rather than get locked into the old patterns that sometimes are really detrimental.
Yeah, so it's almost like, you now have the opportunity at this new plateau to come up with new rules of engagement, new agreements, new mechanisms for connection. So that's lovely. Now we have about 2 minutes left, Jonathan. Is there anything that you want our listeners to know before we log off today?
Well, one thing I'd like to know is them to know is that relationships are really the key to happiness for a large part of our life. They really make the biggest difference, more than even our health or money. And yet people tend not to invest in them and know much about how to make them work harmoniously. So I encourage people, whether it be a book or MDMA therapy or counseling or a seminar, that they invest in learning what keeps love alive, what keeps sex alive. And that's going to have a huge impact on their happiness. Doing the 12 questions of instant intimacy is a simple thing. They can get that at ecstasyforcouples.net. And these little things can make a big difference in how much love we feel. And the bottom line is the amount of love and peace you feel in life is really the most important thing in life.
That is lovely. If you send us your 12 questions with the link to the website, we will post it
Oh, great.
along with this video and along with the podcast that's going to go up later. That might kind of make it easier for people who are looking for it, because I think that there is something really special about those 12 questions and what happens when we start to enter into communication with a willingness to let it just come to the surface with friendliness, acceptance, and a willingness to just hear.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, we'd love to have those posted so people can make use of that.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. If you write anything else, absolutely let us know. It has been a delight to speak with you today. And for all our listeners, thank you again for joining us. It is so great to listen to what you have to share with us each month. And I hope you all have a beautiful remainder of July and into the rest of summer. Wishing you all a gentle day, and be well.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with Dr. Anna Baranowski right here on Reality Radio 101.